In this lesson, we'll talk about setting up a scene to render an image. After completing this lesson, you'll be able to define a scene and download an environment. At some point in time with any great design, you're going to need to share an image of it. Now, Fusion 360 makes this incredibly easy by allowing you to get in Fusion Team, share links, allow people to view in 3D directly on their browser. But a lot of times you want to just make a nice photorealistic still image of your design. So let's talk about how we can do that in Fusion 360 in the rendering workspace. The first thing that I want to do is I want to show both motors, and I want to create a mirror by mirroring components, and I want to mirror both of those motors across the right plane. So this way I have all four motors in the design as well as the body. Now, of course, we're missing a lot of components. We haven't added any of the physical components such as the battery, the speed controllers, the flight controller, or anything like that. Those will have to come in later, but it's never too early for us to learn how to set up and create photorealistic renders. So once you have all four motors, let's go ahead and save the design. We want to go to the Model Workspace dropdown and select Render. Once we're in the Render workspace, it automatically brings up some lighting effects, some shadows. We see the ground plane. So this is already quite a bit farther ahead than just using the modeling workspace in terms of visualization. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to talk about defining a scene and adding our appearances. So let's first talk about the scene setup. Under the setup dropdown, we have the option for scene settings, which is also this light icon. Now, once we're in here, there are a few things that we need to know. The environment section of the settings tab, by default, will have the background set to a solid color. We can change this to an environment, and then go to the Environment Libraries tab and change the look of the background. Now, as we scroll through here, there are several in here that are realistic backgrounds, such as the dry lake bed, the field, and if we go down even further, there are more custom environments that we can use. Anytime you see an environment that has a download icon next to it, all we need to do is click that icon. It'll download it to your locally saved library, and then we can use that. We can double click on these, or we can drag them into the canvas area to apply that scene to our environment. So as we look at this, we can move our quadcopter around, we can zoom in and zoom out to scale it appropriate to the environment, and we can rotate it around so that it looks like it's flying in this environment. So this is a great way to get that realistic image by using some of these advanced backgrounds. If you want to create one that looks more just like a simplified photo booth, we can come into the photo booth, drag that into our canvas area, and now again we're dealing with just a pretty much a mute type background. It's just a gray background, but it actually has an environment around it and some advanced lightings. So now that we have the photo booth background, we're going to go back to the settings tab and we want to change some of the settings. We're going to flatten the ground. If you want to see reflections, we can turn those on and off. We're going to make sure that we're using the environment background, and we're going to leave the brightness set to its default value. If for some reason your scene is too dark or you're using a different color for the appearance on your quadcopter, then you might need to increase the brightness. Since we have a white nylon appearance, we don't really want to deal with that. As we scroll down, we have some camera controls. We can change the focal length of the camera, which is going to adjust the perspective. So for instance, if you are taking a render of something that's relatively large, or you're taking something with a really zoomed in lens, you can take a good look at how that affects the overall render. So this is a cool effect, especially when you have a larger object like a car. For something small like this, it just distorts it a bit too much. So I'm going to go back to a focal length of 35 millimeters and just use that as my option. If you want to turn on depth of field, we can do that. And again, it doesn't really work as well with smaller objects, but this will allow us to focus in on a certain area of the design. And then everything else that's outside of that specific focal point will start to become blurred. All right. Again, this is really good for large objects like cars or airplanes, but things that are smaller in nature where this is essentially 12 by 12 inches, it's not going to make as much sense to use that. We're going to stick with the viewport aspect ratio for right now, but you do have the option to change it, for instance, to a 16:9 HD option. Any changes you make here you can save as the default, but we're going to just close it and use those options. The next thing that I want to talk about is applying an appearance. But for right now, let's go ahead and make sure that we save the file so we can move on to that next step.